Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Charles Rice. I'm the host for today's webinar, Getting Started with Simcenter Testlab. Your presenter for today is Pete Shelderbrand. Pete is an application engineer for the Siemens Simcenter Testlab products.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate that. I'm not going to spend any time in PowerPoint today. I'm going to show running the Testlab software, and we'll go through some of the basics of it. A lot of the things I'm covering are based on an article in our community site. And so I thought I'd start by showing this article and where it is on the community. If you type in Siemens community in Google and the Simcenter Testlabs, part of the Simcenter area on that site, it has all the products of Siemens digital industry software, so things like NXCAD, Technomatics for doing factory stuff, Mendix, MindSphere for Internet of Things. Anyway, I'm in the Simcenter part, and there's both simulation and testing things here. Testing, you'll find articles like the one that we're about to go, Getting Started with Simcenter Testlab. So we're going to kind of follow along on this article, which hopefully does exist. Otherwise, we'll all be very, very disappointed. Maybe we'll try that again, Getting Started with Simcenter Testlab. So this goes through starting up the software, getting into it. We're going to go through how you start up analysis packages, acquisition packages, what the structure of the projects are, and a little bit about reporting. Hopefully that sounds somewhat good to everybody. All right, so the first thing you might do is, hopefully you've got Testlab installed. And if you do, you have this icon on your desktop, or you would have it in your start menu, Testlab 2019.1. When you click on that, you'd think, okay, well, this icon should start Testlab, but it actually opens a bunch of folders. So, we tricked you out of the get-go into many more options. Well, so part of, if you're new to Testlab, part of the challenge is figuring out what it is that you do with this menu. And really, it kind of comes down to whether you're going to analyze data or if you're going to acquire data. If you're going to analyze data, you can go to this desktop. The desktop is a piece of software that lets you view data that you've already acquired, and it lets you do analysis. And what's interesting about this, so it's opening up here, and normally when it opens up, nothing is on, so I'm going to show you what it's like when you would get this thing that says documentation, navigator, and then you got an empty project called project 1 here, and that's what it normally starts up with. If you look in this folder structure, you'll see that a lot of these folders actually say the word analysis in them. So there's a Testlab structures analysis. You also see there's some general processing. These are all things that you do after data is acquired. And if I look in this folder, Testlab structures analysis, you'll see things like modal analysis here. Well, from the desktop, I can actually go to this tools add-ins, and it was already on when we entered, and I can pick out of the desktop modal analysis, because maybe that's the task. I want to analyze some data today. I'm going to do a modal analysis. I hit OK, and that will add in modal analysis and the steps that I need to do it, which you follow from left to right, into the desktop. So from the desktop, I can start this application. It's actually pretty much the same as if I double-clicked here and started my analysis directly. Now, it does say desktop here because I started desktop first. Here it says modal analysis. But what you'll see is after I start this, it'll have the desktop tabs, this documentation and navigator, and then it has all the modal analysis tabs. So really, it's the same thing. If I went under Tools Add-ins here and I turned off modal analysis because I'm going to do a operational deflection shape instead, well, there's an icon for that, or under Tools Add-ins, and Charles, this is the interactive part. Can you guess where I would look under the add-ins to find operational deflection shapes?
The O's, operational deflection shapes?
Yeah, operational. So there it is, operational deflection shapes. And so that starts that just the same. So I guess I mentioned these things because, again, it can be, if you're a new user, a little bit intimidating to see that you have all these different folders, when in fact they're a bit redundant with what are under these add-ins over here. I'm going to exit out here. Now, if it's an acquisition thing, and here you'd have to know something about the names in our software. Something like signature acquisition is used to acquire data. This means it's going to talk to some SCADA's hardware where you've plugged in some transducers, you know, accelerometers, strain gauges, whatever. That you have to start directly. You have to start the acquisition software in the mode that you're going to acquire data. Here under the structures acquisition, for example, are things like impact testing, if you're going to use a modal impact hammer to take some data. Or under environmental are things like vibration control modules, like random control, shock control. There I have to start the acquisition package directly. So that's analysis. I can start from this desktop. Acquisition, I have to start direct. So if you don't like clicking through all these folders, you know, you might do something like create a shortcut here, and then I can just start my desktop anytime I want to analyze data. And if I'm really doing a lot of signature testing, which I think I'll demo, I could create a shortcut for that, and then I would have that on my desktop, and then I wouldn't have to click through all these folders every time I wanted to start those things. If I double click on signature, it looks like this. Isn't that an exciting screen, Charles?
Not yet, but I think it will be.
You think it will be? Well, yeah, it's kind of gray. In the corner here, there's actually an icon, new project. If I click on that, it'll start a new project file with the default settings. So I've clicked on it. Normally it would actually start with project 1. I think I had a project already open, so it's calling it project 2. And it went out, talked to the hardware that I have present, and did its thing, and now I'm in a new project. Now, if I start something like PowerPoint, Charles, when I fire up PowerPoint, what does it start with?
A blank project template?
Yep, like a blank project. It calls it presentation 1. And Testlab is doing the same thing. It starts with a project 1. And if I want to keep this presentation around a while longer, you know, I've made some changes, what should I do here?
I recommend saving.
So you would do File, Save As, right? And give it a name. Same thing in Testlab. So after we start up, I would highly recommend that you do a File, Save As. And you can give this project, instead of having it be called Project 1, give it a name like, I don't know, Fred, and then hit save, and now you're in Project Fred here, and all your data and everything you collect is going to be stored in Fred. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Yeah?
I knew you were going to name it Fred too. I should have guessed.
Yeah, should have guessed. Okay, so well, I don't think we have any questions yet, so let's do a poll. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll here. And the question is, what is the standard and advanced desktop? So the desktop is that thing I started up used for. Hopefully I explained it well. This is more like actually a test if I explain things well or not. So go ahead and vote here. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll here and then I'll share the results. And you can see on my screen it's a little bit small, so I have trouble seeing it. I think I almost did a good job in 70% of the cases. Yeah, the desktop is used to analyze previously acquired data. It's not, well, the Simcenter Testlab desktop, we should have been more specific, is not used to hold your coffee and laptop. But a regular desktop is. So I guess I have to give that to you. And the acquire new data, well, you might as well leave the webinar now. Okay, so we got the signature acquisition started here. And is that showing there, Charles?
No, I think you need to close the poll.
It is closed.
Or hide it from us.
Or go to sharing here and maybe share my screen again.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So I'm in a new project. I called it Fred, and I can acquire data in here. In Fred, if I go to this thing called the Navigator, it lets me see the contents of the project. It's completely empty, but it does by default have this thing called Section 1. And this section concept, it's kind of an interesting concept. This project file, so when I do save as here, it's called Fred with a .lms extension. So the .lms is the project file extension. The section is actually a subdivision within this project. And there's some icons here where you can create a new section. So for example, maybe the first tests I'm going to be doing are in a baseline condition. So I would hit OK here. And now I have a section called baseline. I have a default section that came with the software called Section 1, and I don't have to use that if I don't want to. I can delete that. And then maybe I could create a new section. I'm going to do a modification to my product. At some point, I'll do modification A. And this helps me organize my data. I don't have to use these sections if I don't want to, but I can use them to kind of partition and keep track of the data. Excuse me. So if I was to look inside Windows, I would only see one file. I wouldn't see these subdivisions in the file. So it's something you only see when you view it within Testlab. Okay. I'm going to jump over here to measure. So most of the time when you measure something in Testlab, you can have a display that shows some data in real time here. I'll just throw that in here and hit ARM. I'm going to acquire data. I would hit this start button, and when I do that, it's going to form something called a run. You see a run up here. I hit start. It's measuring data. I hit stop, and I'll keep that run. I have done one measurement, one recording. It automatically actually incremented the run to this next number, run 2. I can hit start. It's taking data again. I'll hit stop. So I've acquired 2 runs worth of data. And I'll disarm here. And I'm going to go back to the Navigator to view the results. So I was in section modification A. So if I look at modification A, I see my 2 runs. Under baseline, there's nothing. So hopefully I meant to do modification, although I can tell you I didn't. Up here, you can switch which section is active. When you do the data acquisition, the data will be stored in whatever the active section is. So if I wanted data in baseline condition, I would record here in baseline. Let's do that for fun once. So I'll hit ARM and start again. So now I'll have one run of baseline condition, 2 runs of my modification. Does data acquisition get any more exciting than that, Charles?
Not too much.
So one run here, and notice it can have the same name, run 1 and run 1, but they're in 2 different sections, so I know that they're 2 different things. And within the run, I have some different parts to the run. One of them is labeled throughput, and in Testlab parlance, is that a word? P-A-R-L-A-N-C-E. The word throughput means time data, or sometimes you think of it as raw time data. So you see we have data versus time here. I switched the axes because the real amplitude in Testlab means absolute amplitude. If I do that, you'll see the data never goes below 0. So we wanted real for this time mystery. So recorded raw time data. And then at the same time, these other settings, online processing, etc., it actually processed some data at the same time. So I have some spectrums and things like that. So a typical run, it'll consist of 2 parts, some folders with processed data that was processed online while you were doing the data acquisition, and then a throughput, and the throughput consists of the raw time data, which you can use to reprocess or reanalyze later on. That makes sense so far, Charles?
Yep.
Yeah? Let's see. So if we look here, at the highest level, I got a project. Then it's divided into sections. And then I have runs within those sections. So that's kind of the hierarchy. If you have a little more complicated project, and by the way, under File here, I can open existing projects. So this one's my test here. This one has a little bit more runs in it. It also has a geometry, and it could also have a analysis. An analysis would be something like mode shapes, etc. So analysis is kind of at the run level. So a geometry is a 3D representation of your test object, and you can animate it and do things like that. So this project has a geometry. So it's possible for the project to have more things than just a project, a section, and a run. But at any rate, project, section, run. All right. So let's do a little quiz on this. And quiz is, what is the file structure hierarchy? Or what is the file structure file hierarchy? That's quite a lot of words here, Charles. People can.
That's a bit wordy. That's a bit wordy. I apologize.
And what we're looking for is the highest level down to the lowest level, from the largest granularity to the smallest granularity. So hopefully people are voting. I'm going to close the poll here and then share the results.
Oh wow, aced it.
Wow. Yeah, there are no slackers in this group. So project is the highest level, then section, then run. Now, I think a few things I wanted to maybe point out about that. You don't have to use sections. So it could have been that when I made my project, I could have said in the project name, Fred Baseline, and I could have had a project called Fred Modified. The sections are really up to you as a user if you want to use them or not. By default, there's a section called Section 1, whether you like it or not. There has to be at least one section. You don't have to use it. Runs, for sure you use. Okay. If I go to measure here. And by the way, if I'm in the middle of measure and I'm like, hey, I don't know what data I have, there's this icon up here, Open Data Explorer. You can actually see the project and what's already been acquired and the contents of it. So Charles, I'm like, okay, I don't know if I liked run one. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say run one here, and I'm going to reacquire that data. What happens, Charles, when I do that? Can I overwrite my data?
No, we do not allow you to overwrite the data.
Yeah, we learned a long time ago, after the release 0.5, like overwriting people's data, not a good thing. Nobody seems to like that. So no matter what you do, you can try putting in the same name. It will not overwrite. It'll auto increment. And by the way, this can be a name with any type of characters that you want in it. It doesn't have to be the word run in a run. We will never overwrite your data because people don't like losing their data in general. You, as a user, have to explicitly get rid of it. So if I'm here in my project and I don't like this run, I have to right click and delete. That's the only way to get rid of this data. And when I pick delete, we're going to give you a little, warning message. This is permanently deleted and you can't retrieve it again. Are you sure you want to continue? We don't have red in it. Maybe it should be red and glowing. What do you think, Charles? Is it?
I think that is something we should put in for an upgrade. Yeah, that should be red.
Yeah, anyway, if I say yes, that data is permanently gone. But that's the only way I can permanently delete the data. So hopefully this structure of the project, test, run, and a little bit about how it's working is making sense to people. Are there any questions out there, Charles?
We don't have any. Oh, we have one question.
Yeah.
They want to know the tabs on the bottom. Can they rearrange them?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And I should have even started by saying, when you first start, you get this project one, and you have to do a save as, just like Word. And then we have along the bottom, we call them workbooks, and it's kind of, we hope it's kind of like a never lost system that you can follow from left to right. And you can see here it progresses, in this case, through a particular task, taking data. And the last step is measure. We hope you have a 50-50 chance of taking data by the time you get to measure. Maybe higher than 50-50 is our goal.
With this group, for sure, Pete, for sure it's higher.
Yeah. So these tabs you step through, and it has things like channel setup. And that's where you set up all your channel information, so you can turn on the channels. You can set up what types of functions you want to calculate during the acquisition, like an overall level if you want. And then when you get to measure, you can measure it. Under tools here, workbook configuration, you can reorganize these things. So you can say, well, I'm going to set up my test in a way that I don't want someone to have to see all this stuff. I can remove some of these steps, for example. So there I just removed some. And by the way, I want to view the results at the end. So I could make the navigator be the last step. So you can change the order. You can actually remove steps. If your colleagues behind your back remove something, that's where you'll find them back. Go to Tools, Workbook Configuration to restore the steps that are maybe missing.
Pete, we got one more question.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get data at multiple frequency resolutions within a single section?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And that was actually in one of the steps that I turned off. So I added back in the acquisition setup. And again, I'm in Signature, so it can depend on the application you're in. And in Signature, there is this multiple sampling rate option that you can turn on. And under more here, you can see that there is an acoustic group, which you can think of as the high sampling rate group. It doesn't have to be sound data necessarily. You can set the sampling rate high there. Then you have a vibration group where you can set the sampling rate low, and it will take that data with those different sampling rates. I'm going to back up a step to the channel setup, which we kind of skipped over. Here, there is a group ID. So anything in the acoustic group will get the sampling rate I specified under acoustic, which again, it doesn't have to be sound. So it could be force data, it could be displacement data, but it'll get sampled at the higher rate, whereas the vibration data will be sampled at the lower rate. That data can also be labeled other if you don't like the word vibration. Vibration and other have the same sampling rate. So that is a little checkbox under acquisition setup. If I go to measure, that data will have different sampling rates. An interesting thing that happens here is that here I can switch between sections. And this is an important thing when you're doing measurements. The channel setup that you have here is specific to the section you're in. So under modification A, I had added these additional channels to do multiple sampling rates. Under baseline, it still has the original setup with just one channel. So the sections actually contain the acquisition settings. They also contain the processing settings. If you had a processing piece of software here and you changed one of the processing settings. And so the sections can also be used to subdivide, if you will, between different sets, different settings. I was about to say between different sets of settings, but that's probably a little bit redundant.
While we're on the subject of configurations, there was another question someone had. Can the workbook configuration be saved?
Yeah. Under File here, you can save a template. And a template, you can give it a name here, like best test ever. And the idea of the template is now I have a starting point where I'll even exit out of Fred here. Now I have a starting point where when I double click on it, it will come back with all the settings and everything else. And the template has no data in it. So it's like it uses all the settings that you had and everything else to initiate the project. So when it comes up, this project one should already have 2 sections, and each section should have slightly different settings. Now, technically, it doesn't store this necessarily in there. There is a little caveat here, and you'll find it on our articles on our website. You have to turn on something called parameter locking. I don't know why. And then under File, you actually get a task shortcut, which is like a super template, which not only stores all the settings, like the channel setup and the number of sections, but it also stores that workbook configuration. So the answer to that question is you want to save as task, and in the task, it'll have those workbook configurations. There's not a place in the workbook configuration menu to save these off, if that's what you're interested in.
What about copying a channel setup from one section to another?
Yeah, if you're in a channel setup here, you do have a load channel setup up here where you can go to a different section. So maybe I want modification A, and I hit OK, and it copies that over. Or I could go to a different project and do that as well. Grab the channel setup from there. You can also take these settings and you can copy and paste them to and from Excel if you want. So the channel settings are meant to be somewhat compatible between them. Okay. Now, another kind of important thing when you're moving software around or moving projects around, when I'm in the navigator here, and I'm in a blank project, so let me go to one that has some data. You can see that I have throughput file, the time history. It looks like it's part of the project, but in reality, it's not. If I'll go to where I have some project, see if I can find a good one here. Okay, so here I have a project, my test, and I'm going to give you another trick here. I'm going to close this project. I still have signature open, and I can, I think this works, drag that project over to here, and then it opens it. So I can actually drag projects onto the software that's running to open them from Windows. Anyway, this project .lms contains the sections and the settings and the process data, but there's a folder you see in Windows, and that folder actually has, you know, if I was to go into the project file itself, it has this throughput file run1, and that is actually contained, our time files have an extension LDSF. It's contained in the folder next to the project. If I was to copy this project up on my network drive to analyze it, and I forgot to bring this folder, this link to the throughput file won't work. And we do this on purpose because time files can be very, very big. And so they can make the project very big. You want to keep the size pretty small. We also want you can actually go into, from another project, I can go into that folder and I can actually access and view the time data, and I can do that without interfering with the project that's currently open. So the time files are technically stored in a folder of the same name. They appear to be kind of part of the project, but they're actually separate. Keeps the file sizes smaller and more manageable, allows things to be modular. But you need to be aware of it if you move things around in Windows. If you're copying a project from one directory to another via Windows, don't forget that folder with the same name. Okay. Did that make sense to you, Charles?
Yeah, thanks. That was a great point.
Yeah. Were there some other questions in the meantime?
Nope, I think that's the questions right now.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, wait. We got one
yeah.
more.
Yeah.
How can you copy data into a project?
Oh, that's a good question. So here I am in my project, and in this navigator, it'll automatically show you a link to your current project, right, that you did file open with. But under my computer, you'll see all your network drives, your disk drives, etc., and you can navigate and look at data from other projects. And if you look at them, you can view it. That's nice. But you might actually go in and maybe find, let's see if I can find a good example. That's a pretty busy directory there. So I might find, I might find projects that have lots of projects without data in them. Yeah, let's, I know where some data is, deep on the system here. So I'll go in here, and all right, this project, I think, oh yeah, this got a few runs of data.
That's the mother load.
Yeah, I found the mother. So I could grab a bunch of runs like this, pick copy, right? And these are way down on my D drive somewhere. And then I can come up to the project I'm in, right click and pick paste. And I selected the runs on purpose because it expects runs under a section. So it kind of honors that hierarchy when you copy paste. And now I have all the runs from that project. It actually made a physical copy to this one. And if I hit save, now if I go to the directory my test here where this project came from, see, I got all those runs are duplicated. Before I only had the run 1. Now I got all these, and then they have the corresponding LDSF in them. If you were to do a save as here, put it on your network or whatever, it's going to copy the .lms with all the process data plus that LDSF. It's only when you do the copying in Windows that you can run into some potential issues. Okay, when you're done with the data, you can be in the navigator here. There's some icons for most popular displays, and you can grab data from these icons and drop them, grab data and drop them in the display. Now, let me just kind of back up. If there were no displays, no drag and drop. So in Testlab here, you have to open the display first, and you got to decide the kind you want to display the data in, and then you can drag and drop. And notice when I drag and drop, see there are yellow folders here. I cannot drag these yellow folders. You need to see this blue icon next to the data. That is something that's draggable and droppable into a display. So if I was to open up something like a waterfall display here and went into waterfalls, notice I keep going till I see that blue icon, and then I can drag the blue icon over into the display. So it's a drag and drop operation. I can have as many displays open at a time as I want. Put them in here. And then if I want to put them in Word or PowerPoint, something like that, I can copy them out as metafiles, bitmaps. That's on this tab here. Or as this thing called a active picture. And an active picture is pretty nice. If I right click and hit paste, I have the image, but an active picture is a little bit different. If I double click on it, it activates, and I can use some of the controls like I have in the software, like zooming in, zooming out, and putting on a cursor, reading out the data values, switch this format to dB, for example. And you can do little calculations too. I could add something like a double X cursor, and I can say, hey, I want to know the maximum over this RPM range. So I pick max, and it tells me in the legend here what the maximum is. And I can do a copy values here and jump into Excel and pick paste. And now I have the maximum values in Excel. I didn't have to, this was a static image. I couldn't read those maxes out, or I'd have to get a ruler or something and try and guesstimate what those maxes were. Here I got them very precisely. In the active picture, we kind of have an end-to-end traceability. So that means I can also look at the data properties of this active picture, and I can get an idea of how the data was processed, what project it came from originally, what the cal factor was that was used on the data, what type of window, all that kind of stuff. So I know, if this had the right cal factor, wrong cal factor, etc.
I got a question about active pictures, Peter. Do you have to have Testlab installed on your computer to view the active window?
If you have it installed, that's great, and it'll work. If you do not have it installed, then you have to install a active picture plugin. So if I get on our website, we have the articles about how active pictures work. And one of the articles, I think, active picture plugins available. They're freely downloadable, no license required. You can just download this and anyone can install it on their PC. And then if you sent a PowerPoint to someone that had an active picture If they didn't have this installed, it would just be a static image. So they'd see exactly what you intended. But if they downloaded this and installed it, then they could activate it and do all the things that we were just doing with the active picture. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. Well, since people were quizzing or asking us questions, Charles, only fair to turn around and ask them questions. Shall we do another poll?
I think we should.
All right. So true or false, is throughput data stored in the project file? That's the .lms file. Go ahead and vote on that. Throughput data is what we call the raw time data. All right, let's look at the results here. Ooh, for a second, it looked like there was 100%, which would have been good because throughput data is never stored in the project file. It's stored outside the raw time data. So we don't like storing it in there. And we do that again to keep the file size a bit smaller, keep it a bit modular, and that means you also have to be careful when you're copying the data. All right, I'm going to do another quiz just because, you know, like a big finale, if you will. So, what are active pictures? Who wrote these options, Charles?
Somebody who thinks he's funny.
Pictures of people exercising. GIFs of your data. All right, well, looks like some people have your sense of humor there, Charles. So we did get some votes for pictures of people exercising, and I guess you have to argue that it's an active picture. But yeah, it's the ability that Testlab feature allows you to change a graph. So good.
Pictures of people exercising.
All right, so let me show my screen again here. And I guess question would be, did I cover everything that we thought would be helpful? So this is the article, talks about the sections and how they're managed, runs. Creating shortcuts is helpful, so you don't have to be see all those icons when you start up. Looks like we did a good job of covering everything I wanted. Again, if there were more questions, we'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, I want to thank everybody for attending, and we hope this was useful in getting you oriented with Testlab and getting started with it. So thanks and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Really appreciate that. And thank you, everyone who attended. And as I said earlier, I'll send out a follow-up email, which will contain Pete's presentation, as well as a link to a recording of this webinar and links to other upcoming webinars in the month of August. If you have any further questions on getting started with Testlab, yeah, please feel free to reach out to Pete or myself. We'll be happy to help. And like Pete said, other than that, have a great day and hope to see you in another webinar in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.